Drake does not own his music, and by the last minute of this breakdown that sentence is going to hit harder than any bar he's ever written. Before we roll a single inch further into what might be the ugliest paperwork story in the history of rap, I hope every one of you tuned in right now is doing well, because for the front row apologists that we are about to walk directly into the light today, this one is going to sting. Welcome in. Whether you are hearing me for the first time or you have been rocking with this channel since the beginning, you already know the drill. Hit the like button and really hit it, because I want the algorithm to hear us stomping on the floor together. I want it loud enough that every receipt-blind cheerleader who has been screaming that Drake owns his masters gets the notification personally. Do that, and let me pour the rest of the story into your ears. Look, hear me on this. The masters conversation around Drake is the single most misunderstood argument in modern hip-hop, and it is misunderstood on purpose. It has been misunderstood on purpose for over a decade. Somebody made money on the confusion. Somebody is still making money on the confusion. And by the time this video ends, you are going to know exactly who signed which line, who cashed which check, who kept quiet during which lawsuit, and why the number $100 million is the most misleading price tag in the last 20 years of black music. Buckle in. Here is the short version, and I promise the long version gets darker. Drake, the biggest commercial rapper of an entire generation, did not own his first 5 studio albums. He did not own Thank Me Later. He did not own Take Care. He did not own Nothing Was the Same. He did not own Views. He did not own Scorpion. That is the prodigious run. That is the run that reset the streaming era. That is the run that turned Toronto into a capital city on the rap map. And through every second of it, Drake was not the owner. Drake was the asset. Drake was the thing everyone else was fighting over while he cashed advances and smiled through interviews. And the men who were doing the fighting? Birdman. Slim. Lil Wayne. Universal. A ghost company called Aspire Music that most of you have never even heard the name of out loud. Today we lay it out on the table and we count the bodies. Now the reason we are back on this topic in the summer of 2026, the reason this conversation is boiling on every timeline right now, is because a commentator by the name of Eric Jackson has been walking his own version of this story through the algorithm all week. And I am not here to slander the man. His research is solid. His delivery is calm. His framing is clean. But there is a version of this story that lives underneath his version, and that is the version I have been telling for years, and that is the version that names the ghost, names the shell, names the escrow account, and names the street pressure that no PDF ever mentions. Eric gave you the surface. I am about to hand you the floor tiles. And underneath those floor tiles is a basement most of the culture has never been allowed to walk into. So put your shoes on. We are going down there together. Before we can even talk about who sold what to whom, you have to understand the structure, because in the music business the structure is the whole card game. Go back to June of 2009. Drake, the artist, signs his recording contract. But he does not sign it directly with Universal. He does not even sign it directly with Cash Money. He signs it with Young Money, which is Lil Wayne's imprint, which Wayne founded in 2005, which sat underneath Cash Money, which was Birdman's company, which was distributed through Republic, which is a Universal subsidiary. Count the layers. There are 4 of them stacked on top of one artist. Young Money on the ground floor. Cash Money on the second. Universal Republic on the third. And on the fourth, invisible from every angle unless you are reading pleadings, sits a company you were never supposed to remember, Aspire Music. Aspire Music is the ghost in this house. Aspire was co-founded by Jazz Prince, the son of Jay Prince from Rap-A-Lot, the man who first put Drake's music in front of Lil Wayne, along with Cortez Bryant, who was Wayne's manager at the time, and a third quiet partner most casual fans never learned the name of. And here is the part nobody talks about loud enough. Before Drake ever inked a page with Young Money, before Cash Money ever cut a check for him, before Universal ever pressed a Drake CD, Drake was already signed to Aspire. Aspire owned him first. And when the machine came calling, Aspire did what small labels do, they furnished the artist to the majors and locked in a paper promise that they would eat off the back end. That paper promise said Aspire was owed 1/3 of the net profits from Drake's exploitation and 1/3 of the copyrights in the master recordings for his first 6 albums. 1/3. From day one. On paper. Signed. Then the checks did not come. For a decade the checks did not come. For a decade Aspire Music watched Drake become the biggest rapper alive, watched Thank Me Later go platinum, watched Take Care win a Grammy, watched Nothing Was the Same set records, watched views obliterate streaming, and every single week Aspire opened its mailbox and every single week the mailbox was empty. Birdman has said the quiet part out loud in interviews. Birdman has admitted on camera that Drake's royalties sat in escrow for over 10 years while the lawyers argued about whose name went on which line. 10 years of platinum plaques hanging on someone else's wall while the original signer of the artist got nothing. 10 years of streaming numbers piling up on a spreadsheet in an accountant's office while the label that discovered him was told to keep waiting. 10 years is not a delay. 10 years is a decision. So in 2017 Aspire finally sued. And their filing is the closest thing the public has ever gotten to a receipt. The filing says that in 2008 Aspire Music and Drake entered into an exclusive recording artist agreement that gave Aspire the exclusive right to Drake's services as a recording artist for at least his first 6 albums. The filing says that Aspire then furnished Drake's services to the defendants, meaning Cash Money and Young Money, by way of a June 26, 2009 agreement. The filing says that in return the defendants promised Aspire 1/3 of the net profits and 1/3 of the master recording copyrights. And then the filing drops the hammer. It says that in January of 2013 the defendants induced Drake to break his exclusive artist agreement with Aspire, signed a competing agreement with him, and completely divested Aspire of every right it was owed. In plain English, they walked Drake out the back door of the label that discovered him and locked the door behind him. And that door had a receipt. The 2013 competing agreement, the one that pulled Drake out of Aspire and stapled him harder to Young Money, actually contained language promising Drake more than $10 million that was supposed to be paid to Aspire. $10 million that belonged to the original label. $10 million that instead landed in the pocket of the artist. And an additional $4 million on the albums that had already been furnished. $14 million, on paper, taken from a ghost company that had been holding Drake's paper since 2008 and never seen a dime. Think about that arithmetic. Think about who benefits when the original label goes hungry and the artist gets fed extra. Somebody wrote that clause. Somebody signed that clause. Somebody knew exactly what that clause was doing. That case settled outside of court in 2019 for an undisclosed sum, and the public never got to see the number. Aspire evolved and rebranded into what is now known as Mob Ties. But here is the piece of that lawsuit that mattered to the whole industry, not just to Aspire. Buried in that filing was an accusation that the defendants had caused the copyrights in Drake's masters to be falsely registered with the United States Copyright Office without acknowledging Aspire's partial ownership. False registration. On the biggest rap catalog of a generation. From day one. That is not a technicality. That is a fingerprint on a crime scene. That is the piece the culture has never absorbed. The registrations at the Copyright Office, the official public ledger of who owns what in American music, were, according to Aspire's own pleading, filed in a way that hid the truth. And when the ledger is wrong on the front end, every dollar that flows off that ledger for the next 20 years is flowing to the wrong address. Now stay with me, because this is where the Cash Money side of the story enters, and this is where the number that everybody quotes at you starts falling apart. Everybody in your comments section, everybody on your timeline, everybody in a barbershop right now will tell you the same thing. They will tell you Cash Money sold Drake's masters to Universal for $100 million. That is the folk tale. That is what the algorithm has trained an entire generation to repeat. And it is wrong. It is wrong on the seller, it is wrong on the pool of masters, and it is wrong on what the check actually bought. Cash Money did not sell Drake's masters. Cash Money was never the sole owner in the first place. Cash Money was one seat at a 4-chair table, and only one chair got up and sold, and that chair did not belong to Birdman. If you take nothing else from this whole breakdown, take that. Rewind it. Replay it. Tell it to the next person who tries to argue you down on this. To understand why, roll the clock back further than 2009. Roll it back to 1998. Cash Money is a New Orleans independent, doing serious regional numbers off Juvenile, Turk, BG, and a teenage Lil Wayne. Universal comes knocking. Universal wants distribution. The deal that gets cut, reported through second-hand sources because the paper has never been published, is a 3-year distribution agreement worth a reported $30 million, with somewhere between 80 and 85% of the split going to Cash Money's favor. And the key clause, the clause that every source agrees on, is that Cash Money kept ownership of its masters. Universal distributed. Birdman owned. That single clause is why Birdman can sit on a podcast 26 years later, look the camera dead in its eye, and say he owns 100% of his masters. For the Cash Money pool, there is no public evidence that he is lying. Wendy Day negotiated that deal, by the way, and never got fully paid for her work on it. That is a receipt on top of a receipt. That is the culture eating its architects. Remember that name. Wendy Day. Write it down. Because when the history books finally get written on the Cash Money era, her name is the name that gets pushed to the back of the credits while everybody else takes the cover photo. Now hold 2 pools in your head. Pool 1 is the Cash Money Masters, Birdman's pool, untouched, owned outright since 1998. Pool 2 is the Young Money Masters, the pool that Drake's albums were physically released through. And Pool 2 is about to trade hands, twice, in ways nobody put in a press release. If you cannot hold those 2 pools separately in your head, everything that comes next is going to sound like a contradiction. It is not a contradiction. It is a 2-pool story pretending to be a 1-pool story on purpose. Fast forward to 2014. Wayne and Birdman, who had been described in interview after interview as father and son, start crumbling. The Carter V is finished and Cash Money refuses to release it. It sits on a shelf for years. In January of 2015, Wayne sues Birdman and Cash Money for $51 million. The lawsuit drags for 3 full years. In September of 2018 it settles. And what did the public learn about the settlement? Almost nothing. Rolling Stone reported it. Billboard reported it. And both outlets were reporting from what Wayne himself said in interviews after the fact. Wayne left Cash Money. Wayne received an undisclosed sum. Wayne walked away with sole ownership of Young Money, the imprint he founded, after Birdman's 49% transferred to him in the settlement. That is the paperwork we know. What the settlement said about the masters themselves, silence. Total silence. The documented terms covered the imprint and the money. On the masters there was nothing. And when there is silence on the masters in a settlement of this size, you can bet the silence was negotiated harder than any dollar figure in the document. But we can infer. Because 2 years later, in June of 2020, at the exact worst possible moment in modern human history, the middle of a global pandemic, the middle of a national lockdown, the middle of the summer where nobody was paying attention to catalog trades because everyone was paying attention to hospitals, Wayne quietly sold. And here is the piece that nobody prepared me for when I first went digging. There was no press release for the sale. There was no announcement. There was no Billboard exclusive. There was no smiling handshake photo. The biggest single catalog transaction in the history of hip-hop, the deal that the whole culture now quotes as the $100 million deal, became public knowledge only by accident. By December 10 of 2020, Ronald Sweeney, Lil Wayne's ex-manager, a name most of you had never heard until this week, filed a lawsuit against Wayne in California claiming $20 million in unpaid commissions. And inside that filing, in one sentence, buried in an adversarial complaint, sits the only paper trail the public has ever gotten. That sentence states that Wayne was able to sell the Young Money Masters to Universal Music Group for in excess of $100 million. That is the entire receipt. One sentence. One lawsuit. One angry ex-manager. Universal declined to comment. Wayne has never publicly confirmed the number. And every article you have ever read that quotes 100 million as gospel is quoting an allegation inside somebody else's lawsuit. Now here is what almost every hip-hop analyst gets wrong when they repeat that number, and this is the piece Eric Jackson glossed over, and this is the piece I need you to understand before we go any further. When Wayne cashed that check, Wayne was not selling Drake's masters. Wayne was selling Young Money's share of Drake's masters. There is a canyon between those two sentences. Young Money was not the only owner. Cash Money still had a share. Universal already had a share from the original 2009 structure. Aspire had a contractual claim to a third of it that had been simmering in litigation since 2017. And now, on top of all of that, Wayne walked in and sold his slice out from under everybody. That is not a clean transaction. That is a knife fight over a pie that 4 different people had already been eating from. And here is why the $100 million figure sounds smaller when you actually understand the math. Wayne owned 51% of Young Money. Birdman had owned the other 49%, before that 49% transferred to Wayne in the 2018 settlement. So by the time Wayne sold, Wayne fully controlled the Young Money imprint. But Young Money itself was only ever one shareholder among many in the actual master recordings. So $100 million did not buy Drake's masters. $100 million bought Young Money out of the equation on Drake's masters. Universal walked away with a bigger slice of the pie. Birdman's Cash Money slice was untouched. Aspire's contractual slice was still being fought over in a separate courtroom. And Drake himself, sitting at the bottom of that 4-layer cake, had no seat at the table where the check got cut. He had no vote. He had no signature required. His mentor, the man who discovered him, sold Drake's shadow to the biggest label on earth, and Drake reportedly never even got a phone call. Nicki Minaj, by the way, was reportedly in that same package. Same story. Same silence. Same trade. Here is the part where a lot of you in the comments are going to want to interrupt me. Because a lot of you are going to say, Nolan, come on, Nicki got taken worse than anyone. And I want to give Nicki a small, real piece of credit before we roll on. Back in 2009, when Nicki signed as a rookie with no leverage, she held on to her 360 rights when almost every other artist in her lane was signing them away. She saw the game earlier than her contemporaries. She read the paper better than her contemporaries. That did not stop her early masters from being in somebody else's package when the sale went down. But she was awake. She was one of the only ones awake. Say what you want about her music arc, say what you want about her feuds, say what you want about her fanbase, she read the fine print. Hats off. Now let's do the math from the other side, because this is where the Birdman contradiction that everybody keeps pointing at actually stops being a contradiction. Birdman says he owns 100% of his masters. Sir Lucian Grange, the chief executive of Universal Music Group, said under oath in an August 2025 declaration that Universal owns the bulk of Drake's recording catalog and publishing. On the surface, those two statements cannot both be true. On the surface, one of them has to be lying. But once you understand that Cash Money and Young Money were always two different pools, and once you understand that Wayne sold Pool 2 in 2020 while Birdman kept sitting on Pool 1, both men can be telling the truth simultaneously. Birdman never sold. Universal bought, but Universal bought from Wayne, not from Birdman. Two pools. Two owners. Two truths. One catalog. And a whole industry that was allowed to conflate them for over a decade because the conflation kept the public confused and the confusion kept the checks quiet. Now roll the tape forward one more time. In 2021 Drake releases Certified Lover Boy through his own OVO sound imprint, with Republic distributing. Billboard reads the transition as Drake finally owning or controlling his masters going forward. Reed is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The contract itself has never been published. It is an inference. It is a hopeful reading. And in 2022, Drake re-signed with Universal in what was reported as one of the largest recording deals ever inked in the history of the industry, a so-called LeBron-sized deal, reportedly approaching $400 million. The terms? Not disclosed. The Masters Clause? Not disclosed. The Publishing Clause? Not disclosed. The percentage split? Not disclosed. Every single one of those numbers you have seen in a headline is either an inference, an anonymous source, or an educated guess. But here is where the paperwork blackout gets really loud. When Drake sued Universal in 2024 over the Kendrick Lamar record, Not Like Us, Universal filed papers in that case saying, out loud, that they owned the bulk of Drake's recording catalog and his publishing. Sworn declaration. On the record. In court. And the same year, in the same litigation, Lucian Grange said the same thing under oath. So here is the picture that emerges when you stack every document side by side. Drake spent his first decade not owning his music. Wayne sold his slice for a 9-figure paycheck without Drake in the room. Drake signed a $400 million mega deal that the label then interpreted as buying whatever remained of his masters and his publishing back into their pocket. And Drake, the artist at the bottom of the cake, ended up cashing the biggest advance of his life while still, in Universal's own courtroom words, not owning the bulk of his own recording catalog. So when Drake fans in your replies want to argue that Drake is independent, when they want to argue that OVO sound is a fortress, when they want to argue that the LeBron deal made Drake bulletproof, the vault door is wide open now. Universal is on record. Grange is on record. The Aspire pleading is on record. The Sweeney complaint is on record. Every single one of those receipts points to the same answer. Drake, in the middle of what was supposed to be the biggest artist-owned era of his career, is functionally a tenant in his own building. You can decorate a tenancy however you want. You can call it Champagne Poppy. You can call it OVO forever. You can call it certified anything. If your name is not on the deed, you are renting. And Drake, as of the last sworn declaration Universal filed in court, is renting. Now let me address the number one question I know every one of you is about to leave in the comments. Because I know it is coming, and I know it deserves an answer. Why doesn't Drake just re-record his old albums the way Taylor Swift did? Why doesn't he pull a Taylor's version on Thank Me Later and Take Care and Nothing Was the Same and Views and Scorpion, gut the originals, kneecap the value of Universal's slice, and take the culture back? 3 reasons. Ready? Reason number 1. Taylor's masters were owned by an enemy. Big Machine Records sold Taylor's catalog to a party she did not want in charge of her work, and when Taylor re-recorded, she was burning the barn of somebody she was already at war with, and her own label at the time cheered while she lit the match. Drake's masters, on the other hand, sit inside Universal, and Drake is currently signed to Universal for the biggest deal of his career. If Drake re-records, he is not burning the barn of an enemy. He is burning the roof over his own head while he is still living in the apartment. Landlords do not stay landlords when tenants burn the roof. And Universal is not a landlord who takes a torch to the ceiling lightly. Reason number 2. Re-record clauses. Standard modern recording contracts contain clauses that block artists from re-recording their older work for a specified number of years after their contract expires. Taylor was only able to re-record when her window had already expired, and the second she pulled it off, every label in the industry lengthened those clauses across every new contract signed. So even if Drake wanted to walk the Taylor's version road, we do not know publicly what his re-record clause actually says. It has never been leaked. Nobody has published it. And history says post-Taylor those clauses got a lot meaner. Somewhere in Universal's legal filing cabinet there is a page with a re-record clause on it, and I would bet everything I have that the number of years on that clause is closer to 20 than to 7. Reason number 3, and this one is a culture point, not a paperwork point. Rap is a producer-heavy, sample-heavy, feature-heavy art form. A Marvin's Room re-record in 2026 means re-clearing every sample on the record, relicensing every producer contribution, calling every feature back into the booth, and rebuilding every uncredited engineering choice that made the original feel like the original. And even if Drake pulled it off in a De La Soul-style crusade, the culture still treats the original take as the artifact. It would not be a reclamation. It would sound like karaoke. Rap fans respect the original take the same way jazz fans respect the original session. You cannot re-record a moment. You can only remember it. But, and this is the piece that Taylor Swift's whole crusade taught the industry that most rap fans still have not internalized, the threat alone was enough. Taylor did not just take her music back. Taylor repriced everybody's catalog. Every rap master on earth got more expensive the day Taylor's Red re-release charted at number 1. Every label executive on earth had to look at their own vaults and ask what would happen if their biggest artist walked the same road. And that fear is baked into every conversation that Drake and Universal are having behind closed doors right now. Even if Drake never records a single Taylor's version, the shadow of Taylor's version is sitting in the room with him. Now let me pull the thread all the way back to the top, because I want you to see the shape of this thing. Here is what actually happened, in order, from the outside looking in. In 1998, Cash Money kept its masters. Birdman started eating. In 2008, Aspire Music signed Drake and locked in a promise for 1/3 of his first 6 albums. In 2009, Drake signed to Young Money under Cash Money under Universal, and the 4-layer cake was baked. In 2013, Drake was pulled out of Aspire's exclusive artist agreement into a competing agreement that promised him over $10 million that was supposed to go to Aspire, and Aspire's checks kept sitting in escrow. In 2015, Wayne sued Cash Money for $51 million. In 2018, Wayne settled, walked away with sole ownership of Young Money, and the master's clause of the settlement stayed silent. In 2019, Aspire settled quietly, out of court, for an undisclosed number. In 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, Wayne sold the Young Money masters to Universal for in excess of $100 million, and the world only found out because of one line in a manager's complaint 6 months later. In 2021, Drake started releasing through OVO with Republic Distribution, and everyone read that as him getting his freedom. In 2022, Drake re-signed with Universal for a reported $400 million. In 2024, Universal declared under oath in the Kendrick Lamar litigation that they own the bulk of Drake's catalog and publishing. In 2025, Grange repeated it, under oath, in a sworn declaration. That is not a music career. That is a chain of title. And the chain has been rattling in courtrooms for 17 years while the man at the end of it was being sold to fans as the most independent, most powerful, most in-control rapper of his generation. So what does this actually mean for you? What does this mean for the culture? What does this mean for every kid in a basement right now typing beats into a laptop thinking a Universal deal is going to save their life? It means 3 things, and I need you to write them down. First, masters are a huge part of the game, but they are not the whole game. Publishing is the other half. Publishing is the songwriting, the composition, the top line, the production credits, the mechanicals, the sync royalties, and the passive income streams that keep paying out for the rest of your life. If you own your masters but sign away your publishing, half your plate is gone before the food ever arrives. Drake, in the reported $400 million deal, almost certainly gave up publishing on top of whatever master's interest he still had. When Universal calls that deal buying his catalog, that is not marketing. That is accounting. And accounting always tells the truth eventually, even when the marketing department is still lying. Second, the $100 million number that gets repeated in every barbershop and every timeline is not a valuation. It is a multiple. When somebody sells a catalog for $100 million, that number is not what the catalog is currently worth. It is a projection. The label pays a multiple of the annual earnings because they believe they can generate 2, 3, 5, 10 times that number over the lifetime of the catalog. So a $100 million sale might be for a catalog that earns $8 million a year. The buyer is not paying the value. The buyer is paying the future. That is why Universal wanted the Young Money masters at that price in the middle of a pandemic. They were not paying for what those albums had earned. They were paying for the next 20 years of what those albums would earn as streaming continued to compound. And every hip-hop artist watching this needs to internalize that math, because the label always knows what your catalog is worth on year 20. You almost never do. Third, every single number you have heard about Drake's ownership is a rumor sitting on top of a rumor sitting on top of an adversarial court filing. There is no clean public record. There is a 1998 deal known only by second-hand reporting. There is a 2018 settlement whose master's terms were never disclosed. There is a 2020 sale known only through one sentence in a lawsuit filed by an ex-manager. There is a 2022 megadeal whose terms are hidden. And there are 2 sworn 2024 and 2025 declarations that finally tell you where the catalog ended up. Every point in the chain, every single link, is either second-hand or adversarial. The culture has been arguing about numbers that nobody has ever seen on official letterhead. And that is not an accident. That is the paperwork blackout. That is the design. Let me be blunt about something before we start heading toward the end of this thing. The reason the paperwork blackout exists is because when you actually see the paper, the story is not glamorous. The story is not luxurious. The story is a young Toronto kid who got scooped by a small label, handed off to a bigger label, layered under 2 more labels, dragged into somebody else's legal fight, watched his mentor cash a 9-figure check on his back, and then years later signed the biggest deal of his life to buy back a slice of himself. That story does not sell hoodies. That story does not sell VIP tickets. That story does not sell the champagne poppy aesthetic. So the story stays quiet. The paperwork stays sealed. The receipts stay adversarial. And a whole generation of kids keeps signing 360 deals thinking they are about to become the exception. There are no exceptions. There are only different pools. And whoever controls the pool controls the water. Now I know some of you are going to say I am being too hard on Drake. Some of you are going to say the man has still built the largest commercial rap career in modern history and that the paperwork does not matter because the check's cleared. Fine. I hear you. But the check's cleared on the front end. The check's cleared while the catalog was being traded. The check's cleared while the rights were being consolidated behind him. When the streams keep running 20 years from now, when the sync deals keep firing, when the biopic gets made, when the vinyl reissue drops, when the estate has to file, the front row apologists are not going to be in the room. Universal is going to be in the room. And Universal already told you, under oath, whose room it is. Shout out to Eric Jackson for putting this conversation back in the middle of the timeline. His research is real. His reporting is calm. He is doing the culture a favor by keeping the paperwork visible in an era where everybody just wants to argue about who won a rap beef. But the paperwork is not just about who won. The paperwork is about who owns. And who owns is the only question that outlives the beef. 20 years from now nobody is going to remember whether Family Matters got 12 million views or 18. 20 years from now, somebody is going to be sitting in an accounting office at Universal Music Group signing a check to somebody. And the question is only whether the name on that check ever belonged to Drake in the first place. And here is one more layer I have to put on the table before we close, because it changes how the last 5 years of this saga read. There have been persistent whispers, and I want to underline that word, whispers, that after the Scorpion album in 2018, Drake's team negotiated a contract amendment that was supposed to allow him to recover a portion of the masters on the earlier albums, and to own a bigger share of the masters on the albums that came out from Certified Lover Boy forward. I cannot show you a copy of that amendment. Nobody has ever leaked it. But when you read Universal's court filings against that whispered amendment, the picture that emerges is not one of an artist who succeeded in clawing his catalog back. The picture that emerges is one of an artist who traded whatever recovery leverage he had for the biggest advance of his life. He got the $400 million bag. Universal got the bulk of the catalog on the record. And the amendment that was supposed to be a comeback story looks, in hindsight, like a settlement dressed up as a coronation. Look, hear me on this one last time before we wrap. The 4-layer cake was baked before Drake was famous. The Ghost Company was written into the paper before he had a plaque on the wall. The escrow account was opened before he had a Grammy. The Mentor made $100 million on the way out before the sale ever hit the trades. The mega deal was signed before the ownership was ever clean. And every single link in that chain, every single one, was known only because somebody sued somebody, or somebody was forced to declare it under oath, or somebody accidentally dropped a sentence in a complaint on a Wednesday afternoon in December. That is the paperwork blackout. That is the machine. That is the universal chain of silence. And the vault door, after 17 years of quiet, is finally wide open. Now here is where I hand it to you. Because I did not make this video to end the argument. I made this video to give you the receipts. What is your read? Do you think Drake is going to walk away from Universal when this contract closes and finally chase full ownership in his mid-40s? Do you think Wayne knew exactly what he was selling when he cashed that pandemic check, or do you think even Wayne got played? Do you think Aspire settled for pennies, or do you think their number was bigger than we will ever know? Do you think Birdman is telling the truth about 100% of the cash money pool, or do you think there is another ghost sitting inside that pool that hasn't sued yet? Put your take in the comments and let's talk. Hit the like if you learned something. Hit subscribe if this is the first time you are showing up here, because we do this kind of paperwork breakdown every single week and I do not skip the boring parts. Share this with a friend in your group chat who has been screaming that Drake is independent, send them the receipts and let them argue with the court filings, not with you. Keep your eyes on the paperwork. Every sale, every settlement, every silence is a signature you were never meant to read. We just read them together. And we are going to keep reading them together, week after week, until the whole chain is visible. Until then, protect your masters, learn your publishing, read every clause twice, and never, I mean never, trust $100 million rumor without a docket number attached. Peace.